Hey everyone, welcome to Tuesday Tea. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us today. I am so excited about my guest today. I've been watching her through the years and just thrilled that she could spend some time with us today. Courtney Stanley has joined us today to talk about transforming your setbacks into comebacks. And I want to quickly introduce Courtney and then let her kind of fully introduce herself. A lot of you know Courtney already. She may have been an MC at your conference or a keynote speaker. And this is what Courtney does. She is recognized globally as an award-winning change maker, keynote speaker, and an event MC, and also the acclaimed creator of the ever popular podcast, Dare to Interrupt. It's one of my favorite podcasts. If you haven't checked it out, it's a must. She spent the last 10 years helping professionals, entrepreneurs, and organizations engage in game-changing, impactful conversations that empower individuals to tap into their true potential. She's also here to improve team and culture dynamics and drive meaningful change. So over the course of her short career, Courtney has done a lot. She was the youngest member to ever be elected to MPI's International Board of Directors. I remember that, Courtney, by the way. She's a recipient of Smart Meetings 2020 Women in Events Entrepreneur Award, Meetings Today Awards for 2019 and 2020. People Magazine's Most Beautiful People Award, I'm sure, is thrown in there as well. And I'm quite envious, Courtney. If you tell me your eyelashes are real, I'll probably kill myself. But right now, I would love to turn it over to Courtney. She is doing some amazing things through this past year, and I really want her to share with you guys today what she's been up to. And please say hi to Courtney in the chat. Send us your hellos and greetings. Courtney, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Leanne. I'm super excited to be here. This is my first LinkedIn Live, so super fun. And I hate to break it to you, but my eyelashes are real today, not always, but today they are. Sometimes I do the whole falsy thing, and actually I just got into magnetic eyelashes recently, and yeah, it's kind of a hit or miss thing. They can be super glam, but they can also fall off in the middle of your presentation. So, which has happened to me before, and I could just kind of like feel it slipping down my eye, and there was nothing I could do except just blink awkwardly with that fake eyelash sitting there. But anyway, it's great to be here today. I'm super excited to see who we have in our virtual audience. So hi, everybody who's out there listening. And thanks for that introduction too, Leanne. I feel like it always makes me sweat a little bit. I start to squirm and I'm like, stay composed.
Oh, you shouldn't feel that way though. I mean, but you have done a lot over the course of your career and you continue to do some things. And I think that's why a lot of people are watching in or they'll catch this on the replay. We do have a lot of people who do on the replay because you've done so many great things to forward this industry. So anyways, I would love for you to talk to us about how your career has really transformed over this past year. I know you and I have shared a couple things privately, but we would love to hear your story, and the floor is yours.
Sounds great. Well, there has been a lot of change over this past year, and I know that's pretty typical for a lot of people. For me, I never expected to go through the change, the challenge, and the growth that I have over this past year. And people always say that growth doesn't come from your comfort zone and it can be really painful. And this past year was definitely all of those things. So just to give a little bit of background, I've been in the events industry for about a decade now. I started out as a planner. I studied hospitality and events, so I wanted to get into the industry. It was very intentional, and I realized that planning maybe wasn't necessarily the best fit for me, but I really liked the PR and marketing side of events. So I started working for a technology supplier in the events industry and worked in their PR department, their event marketing department, and loved it. And that's really where I started to speak. I started to just raise my hand and apply to speak at all of our industry's conferences. And I did that for a handful of years. And that little side hustle that I never actually thought would turn into something that would be full-time ended up just growing over the years. And actually, I most recently worked for a political environmental nonprofit running events and fundraising and communications for them. And throughout all of these career transitions, I first and foremost gained a lot of entrepreneurial skills working in different sectors, but also working for startups and small businesses and nonprofits that operate on a super lean budget. So I never realized that I was starting to sharpen those tools and really add those tools to my toolkit while building those side hustles of speaking, writing for industry publications, doing coaching work, and also podcasting. So at the beginning of 2020, that was the first time that I decided to stop working for somebody else and look at the side hustles that I had grown over the past 5 to 6 years and turn it into a full-time venture. And of course, the beginning of 2020 seemed a-okay. And then as of March, everything just totally flipped upside down. So if I were to just kind of look at what the journey has been from last year to this year, it has been a complete roller coaster. And there have been some really challenging moments, like losing the majority of my contracts and therefore income all within the span of maybe, 4 to 6 weeks. And then having to really figure out how to be an entrepreneur, how to run a small business, and how to build a business in an industry that was really hurting. So throughout last year, my focus really was on serving my community. So, the temptation was to sell, to try to, make that income back from what I had lost. And I realized that that was such a tone deaf way to approach an industry that was really hurting. And that was my clients and my prospects in my community included. So I decided last year to really make my sales and marketing and business development strategy centered around serving people, servanthood sales, really focusing on content that supported my community, that would help them get through that time, and putting my own initial sales strategy on the back burner. And what that turned into was a really beautiful year. So, I was doing a lot of speaking engagements just for exposure and to help support my community. And then I would say as of August, everything changed. Everything flipped and did that 180 again, and business started coming back. People started knocking on my door, and I entered into this new year, into 2021, not just a survivor as a first-year business owner during a pandemic, but meeting the original financial goals that I had set for myself and feeling more confident than ever going into my second year of business, still during a pandemic. So very long, dramatic roller coaster of a story short. That is essentially what 2020 started out as and where I'm at today.
But it's interesting, Courtney, let's say you didn't leave your job in January, February. When the pandemic hit, and now looking back, would you have made the pivot to this new venture when the pandemic hit in March, or would you have tried to stay in the industry and do something else?
I definitely would not have left my job. There's no way. No, I am not somebody who is excited about taking great financial risk. I tend to be a saver and a planner, and I like to know that at least there's, some hope for making money in the future with an entrepreneurial venture. So no freaking way, Leanne. If I had known that the pandemic was on its way, I definitely would have stayed at that position and just maybe try to ride it out and make the best of the situation and, maybe leave in another year or two. But to be honest, I am really grateful that I didn't know, because I was so much more challenged last year than I would have been if I had started in a normal year. I've grown a lot. I've had to really fight for building this business and really, creating grit within myself as a person. And 'cause it's very emotional too, starting a business and you're on your own and it's already isolating, to be a solopreneur, but then in a quarantined world, in a broken industry, it made me a lot tougher than I would have been had I just started out, a few years back or even a few years down the road.
So our journeys are actually quite similar, with the exception that I'm about 20 years down the line in terms of age. And it's one of the people watching today's live. Her name is Heather Reed. I don't know if you know Heather, but she's going through a pivot as well. And we've talked about that. Heather and I have talked about this ad nauseum. Actually, she was on Tuesday Tea once sharing her pivot story. And we've had, private conversations. There were so many of us who have gone through and continue to go through that roller coaster of entrepreneurship during a year that, we wish we could have held on to our positions. But alas, we couldn't. And one of the words that you use that I'm actually now going to start using is servanthood sales or servant sales. I always used to call it inbound marketing, and that was kind of my shtick with my blog and my videos over the past 5 or 6 years. But I love the word that you use about being servant. And so I'm starting to use that word now in my own life. How has servanthood sales kind of amplified through the work that you've been doing?
So I have to say, I think, so there are a few different types of leadership, and servant leadership is one of the types of leadership that exists. And I've always identified the most with that type of leadership, which essentially just means that you become a leader and you grow as a leader by serving others. And it fits very well with my personality. And so creating a servant sales strategy just felt very authentic to me, where instead of, drowning in my sorrow and my fear of this business crashing and burning, I was able to kind of step outside of my world and look to my community and say, what do they need? What are they going through? What are they feeling? What pain do we have in common? What content can I create that will actually help support them in a time of need, where I'm not going to make any money anyway these next few months. So why not focus on just serving people, and let's just see what happens. And at first, it really wasn't even a sales strategy. It was just what else am I going to do right now? And what better thing can I do than to choose to serve my community? Otherwise, I'm just going to be sitting worrying about money that's not coming in. So it filled my cup to be able to support people, because that's what lights me up. But it also helped to serve my community. So it was definitely a win-win. But what I think was really effective is that people didn't have the budget. They also were going through massive transitions on their own, whether they were losing their jobs, they were losing team members, and they were all of a sudden doing 20 different roles at their company. They were afraid to lose their job. So people were going through all of these things. And when people see somebody who's genuinely trying to help their community, it attracts them to that mission and that value. So what ended up happening is people found value in the message that I was creating and the content that I was creating to support them, but they also started to look more at, what is she doing and how can I serve her? So it became more of a mutual servanthood sales strategy, where people also wanted to support me because I was going out of my way to support them as well. And that really led to a lot of referrals, which in our industry is magic. Everybody knows somebody in the industry. We're such a tight-knit community, and people had really nice things to say about the content that I was creating, but also the mission behind my work to serve others in our community. So I think it really created this ripple effect with an inbound marketing strategy, where all of a sudden people were coming to my website, people were referring me, people were looking at my social media, people wanted to be a part of a community where we were truly supporting one another and we were working together to move forward in the industry. So I don't even think that it was my intention at the beginning for it to cause that domino effect. But in the end, servanthood sales, which just felt authentic to me, brought business back to me, which was incredible. It couldn't have been better.
Well, and that is the essence of inbound marketing, right? Servanthood sales, inbound marketing, and hospitality, I feel, are all interchangeable words. In fact, I was one of my blog posts coming out shortly is how inbound marketing in the hospitality field and in meetings and events just makes sense, because we're built on serving others. That's kind of what we do. We're not in an industry that does anything but serve other people. So servanthood sales in this industry, it's like peanut butter and jam. It's just supposed to go together. there really is no other, the hard sales tactics of other industries, they've never really worked in our industry. And there's a reason for that. It's because we're built on a culture to serve other people and create experiences for them rather than pushing out a sales message, to your point. One of the things I wanted to dive in a little bit deeper, and we didn't talk about this before the call, Courtney, so I hope it's okay, but one of the initiatives that you created along with some of your colleagues was the Meetings 2 initiative. And I know a lot has changed since you founded that kind of movement, but has anything been going on during the pandemic in that field around Meetings 2?
Oh, that's such a good question, Leanne. So I'll back up and I'll just explain to the audience what this particular movement actually is. So with my good friend and industry peer, Sarah Solomon, we both had our own personal experiences of being sexually harassed at live events or at meetings and conferences, or just generally within the industry. And we saw a need to create more awareness around the fact that there is a lot of inappropriate behavior that does happen when, you're at a networking event and drinks are flowing and people have that, vacation mindset, and there are hotel rooms right next door. And I would bet that most people that are listening have either heard of a friend who's experienced some sort of sexual harassment or even assault, or you've personally experienced something on your own. And what ended up happening is that not only did we share our experiences with each other, but we also started hearing more stories from more people in the industry who had been kind of hiding the fact, or, just not feeling like there was a place to share their own story about being sexually harassed or assaulted in the industry. And so we created this movement to create more awareness around the problem, but also to create and provide education to meeting planners and to event planners to help design events that were more safe and to help create protocols that would allow people to understand the process of reporting if something did happen on site. So that said, a couple of great things happened from the Meetings 2 movement. One, a lot of people became aware that there was an issue if they weren't aware. Most people were aware in the first place. Two, a lot of people started to better understand the tools that they had at their fingertips to create those protocols to make a more safe environment. And then three, other industry partners also started to talk more about the issue. So there was the Events Industry Sexual Harassment Task Force that was created, which is a coalition of all of the industry leaders, so associations, that type of thing, that came together to take a stand against harassment or assault from happening at their events. So that was one really cool thing that came out of it. And then there was also industry-wide education that was provided through that task force. Now, what I will say is my concern, I guess, is that with a lot of social movements, they are on the uptick for a while. There's a lot of conversation that happens, and it's a hot topic, for lack of better words, and then it starts to fade out as more, current events become more prominent. So with the pandemic this last year, I would say that the pandemic probably overshadowed most other issues within the industry, outside of some really important conversations that have been taking place around, Black Lives Matter and Stop Asian Hate. And those became really important conversations. But my hope is that those types of conversations continue for a long time until, we've been able to make significant amounts of progress, and maybe it doesn't have to be talked about as much. But I do think that just kind of following the trends of those sizzling topics and, current events, the overall conversation has maybe faded. And to be honest, with the absence of in-person experiences and events also comes the absence of a lot of sexual harassment that could be taking place at those live events. So it could very well be that the conversation starts to reignite when we are back in person, but I do feel like it's taken a little bit of a backseat as other issues have risen to the top this past year.
And those issues require our attention as well. So it's been an important dialogue, but I've been thinking about you and Sarah and your Meetings 2 work. I also have colleagues that work really hard in the green meetings and sustainability and events, which, to your point, has taken a back seat. And when events return, I'm hoping that that becomes the talk of the town as we return to venues that have increased their use of disposables. And this talk isn't necessarily about sustainability, but it definitely brings light to the ebb and flow of our industry and the things that we put center stage and the things that take a back seat. And yes, I'm very hopeful that your work around meetings too and that conversation will continue, because I'm going to bet it'll be a different conversation as we all clamor to get back into live events. And we've been absent for a year. And what has that done to our mindset? What has that done to our confidence walking into a hotel ballroom? Like, do we even know how to network anymore? Or is it all virtual? And I know I caught myself the other day. I was on a virtual call and I finished my bit with, my name is Leanne and I'm finished speaking. And I was like, wow, I hope I don't walk into a networking reception and completely forget how to be a human being. So, I'm hopeful that these dialogues and these conversations kick up again. I watch you and Sarah in social media, especially now you, Courtney, as you're building your business. You're an accomplished MC, you're an accomplished keynote speaker, but you also talk a lot about imposter syndrome. And that one kind of throws me for a loop, because I think most people would see your career to date and see all the great things that you're doing with your business only a year in, and wonder, how can this woman have imposter syndrome? She's got it all together, but you openly talk about it being something that you deal with. And I was hoping that you could share a little bit about that journey with the audience today. I know Heather and I talk about imposter syndrome all the time. So you're in good company, and we'd like to hear what tactics you use to kind of snap yourself out of it. How does it manifest in your life?
Yes, imposter syndrome. Yeah, I do think I will say that I do feel like I have really grown into a more confident version of myself, especially since launching and growing this business. And I think imposter syndrome is something that strikes most people. I think it's so, and also to just explain for the audience, imposter syndrome basically means that you feel like a fraud, even though you are fully qualified in the ways that you're, considering that you're thinking about talking about. So for example, I'm a keynote speaker. If imposter syndrome were to strike, I might think that I'm not worthy of taking the stage. Like, I don't have enough credibility. I don't have enough experience. That whole inner critic dialogue becomes a part of that imposter syndrome. So again, I will say that I have definitely improved my confidence and just the way that I navigate and combat imposter syndrome. But I will also say that don't assume that people have it all together.
I know.
Because they definitely do not. People always have stuff going on behind closed doors, and myself included, literally all the time. This past year has been the most challenging year, and not even just on the professional front, but also on the personal front. There was a lot of crap that happened over this past year, and even within the past couple of weeks, that has been very difficult. So if you are somebody who's looking to your left and you're looking to your right, and you think that those people are perfectly confident and they have no body image issues and they have no confidence issues, chances are they probably do. They've just gotten really good at faking it, or they're starting to work through it, which is a great thing. So I will also say that being the first person to do anything, so taking risks, building a new business, starting a new conversation, being the youngest person sitting around a board table, those types of situations are perfect for breeding imposter syndrome, because you don't feel like you're as qualified as the people sitting around you. And in some ways you might not be, which makes it even more challenging to remind yourself of the value that you truly bring to the table. So I do career coaching in addition to speaking and emceeing. And one of the areas that I specialize in is helping people to rebuild confidence after they have been fired or after they've been let go from a job. So not just rebuilding confidence, but helping them to see their value and what they bring to the table, and also design their own comeback strategy. So how are they going to step into the next chapter? How do they want to feel? What do they want to look like and feel like when they get there? And how are they going to actually take those steps forward? So when I do work with clients that struggle with imposter syndrome, and a lot of people who get fired and lose their jobs definitely struggle with imposter syndrome, because you feel like you were not good enough for that role. And that's why you got let go for a variety of reasons. So one of the exercises that I will take my clients through is to start writing down a list of all of the accomplishments that you have made in your life. So the different experiences, job experiences, the education that you've earned, certifications, awards that you've won. Then I ask them to go a step further and start writing down all of the things that people say that is positive about them, especially the ones that they have where they just hear it over and over again. You're really good at X. And then the next week, somebody says the same thing, to start to just rebuild that sense of, oh yeah, I actually do bring a lot to the table, experience, and also these people clearly see value in me. So it's a good reminder from the outside of what's really coming from the inside. But then I also like to encourage people to get to know themselves a little bit better. So take a couple assessments, do a strengths finder assessment, do the Enneagram assessment, get to know your strengths and your core desires, your core fear, your core weakness, get to know yourself. And that's truly the best gift that you could ever give yourself, is really understanding who you are, what you bring to the table, and how you want to show up to the people and serve the people that are around you. So imposter syndrome is, oh gosh, it's something that so many people struggle with, but it's also something that can be worked through by just starting to really look in the mirror and recognize who you are and what you bring to the table.
And I love that. I know you've shared that exercise a few times with me. And it's so powerful. The one thing I think I would add to that, because there's quite a few people in our industry. Our industry, yes, it has those awards and recognition systems in place, but it doesn't necessarily reward people for the things that they're working on, their internal key performance indicators or their goals and objectives. So I help coach hospitality professionals who may not have that long list of accolades that other individuals have accumulated, to just look at your own goals. And if it's a revenue driven goal, or if it's a personal development goal, a course that you've taken, or a test you've passed, those things you can put into that file as well, as you start to build your career. And, imposter syndrome, you talked about being the younger person around a boardroom table. It'll take you a couple years, Courtney, but when you get to my age, it's still there.
Yeah.
And Heather and I talk about this all the time. Heather and I are both, late 40s, early 50s, dealing with an imposter syndrome around pivoting at our age, right? So doing a pivot in the younger years, you at least can see long-term, you can see the longevity, you can plot and plan the next 20 years of your career. For individuals like myself, 20 years down the road, I'm hoping I'll be retired. And so that road has gotten a lot shorter, and we're doing a complete 180. So the 180 that you did in January, I've been doing since June. But at my age, it's a bit tougher to work through, because we're literally against a clock, which sounds very dramatic, but it's kind of true. I wish I had done this 10 years ago. But then I think, well, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have been ready to do this exact pivot. But imposter syndrome, it was more so about this can strike at any age. And I suspect even 10 years from now, I'll suffer imposter syndrome about something else again and again and again and again. And it's something, I believe it's 70 to 80% of people feel imposter syndrome, which makes me wonder the secret to the other 20% have. And how do I tap into that? Especially after the year that we've had. So anyways, thank you for sharing your tips about your brag file. Courtney, if people want to learn more about your keynote addresses and how to hire you, how can they find you and get in touch with you?
Yes, thanks for asking, Leanne. Yeah, I'm excited to was here today. I can actually see Heather Reed, my dear friend, commenting, and it's great to see you, Heather. Well, to read you, I guess. So you can get in touch with me by visiting my website at courtney-stanley.com, so you can learn about my different speaking and emceeing, coaching, all those types of services. You can also follow me on social media at Courtney on Stage, or of course, connect with me on LinkedIn. I feel like I'm most active on LinkedIn and Instagram. So yeah, I'd love to see everybody that was here. And Leanne, I do want to just touch on something that you just said about imposter syndrome and it kind of coming in chapters. And I think I think that's very true. I think that when you start to outgrow the chapter that you're in and you're somebody who is willing to take a risk, like, you are in pivoting and shifting your business and doing all those things, with that risk comes doubt, and with that risk comes fear, and with that new chapter of risk comes all of that opportunity to feel like a fraud again. Can I do this? Am I going to make it? Am I good enough? Should I be doing something else? But I think that the earlier you take the risk, the earlier you're able to actually start working through that fear and start to prove your inner critic wrong. So I think I just think back to some of the more challenging experiences that I've had. And again, of course, looking at this past year has been crazy, but even before that, those challenging experiences, the moments where I maybe felt least confident, are the moments that allowed me to grow and become the most confident version of myself. So I think it's necessary to take those risks, and it's necessary to step into those new chapters of imposter syndrome and look them dead in the face and then punch them in the face and move forward, because you're fabulous. Everybody is so valuable and so worthy. And if I could change one thing in this world, I think it's especially for women, that we started to really see ourselves for the amazing people that we are and what we bring to the table.
So true. And, and thank you for saying that. I know, again, Heather and I have talked about meeting those challenges head on and creating this, this file that you mentioned. And one thing I would add to the file is, so over the course of the year, my particular pivot had me creating a service in a completely different way, completely brand new way of delivering my service to professionals. And in that, and being in the industry that we're in during this kind of downturn and pandemic, is I didn't meet my revenue goal. In fact, I fell short of my revenue goal to the point where I felt like a complete and utter failure, which is natural for imposter syndrome. That's definitely one of the symptoms, is you feel like a failure rather than identifying the event itself as a failure. So one of the exercises I had to do when I was going through that failure of missing the mark and missing my goals, was to look at all the things that I had learned in creating that new mode of delivery. And so that really helped reframe the failure itself, because even though I fell short of the actual revenue goal, all of the skills that I had accumulated over the past 6 months, which again, when I started to look at it on paper, I've learned more over those 6 months than I did in the previous 6 years, or maybe even 16 years of my career. So it was fast and furious, all the learning. And so for those creating their brag file, I think it's important to put all of the things that you're learning in that file, because people can't take that away, and you just build on those skills and you keep adding to what you're learning each and every day. And that helps you redefine the failure or the perceived failure that you might be facing.
Yeah, Leanne, I love that you say perceived failure, because I think that's exactly what it is. This is going to sound wild, but I would say most days I experience a moment of feeling like a failure, like pretty much every day. There will just be like an instant. I'm not sitting in it. I'm not believing it for the most part, but the majority of days, there are moments where I'm like, oh my gosh, like, what am I doing? This is ridiculous. Like, I'm not doing as well as I should be, that kind of conversation that's happening in my head. But I do think that it's dangerous to categorize money as the win, or
Yeah.
even like winning an award as the win. Those external things that are totally out of your control, what the market's going to do, whether you get picked for something, whether it's working for a company, invited to a lunch, whatever it is, those types of experiences are the ones that can be stripped away at any second. So
Mhm.
it's really, really important to just be aware that the real definition of failure and the real definition of winning comes from within you.
Mhm.
So if you're doing the work to grow and evolve as a person, as a leader, as a member of your community, that's where the win is. So regardless of whether you make money today or you don't make a dollar this year, what are you doing in regard to the work that you're putting forward? That's the stuff that should be celebrated, not the awards that you win or don't win, not the money that you make or don't make, but the actual battle that you are pushing through that lives within inside you. That's where the strength and the growth really comes from.
Well, and I've been incredibly lucky because I have very smart friends that remind me of that all the time. Heather Reed is one of those individuals. I also have friends outside the industry that remind me of, my family, right? My family, my everything else that I do in my career. But I'm going to go back to one thing. This is where you and I have in common, Courtney, is the value and the insights that one can get from their Enneagram assessment or from their Clifton Strengths assessment. My number one Enneagram is type 3, the achiever. My number one strength with Clifton Strengths, the achiever. So you're talking to someone who measures every single thing according to what they achieve, whether it's a daily achievement, a weekly achievement, a yearly, or a career-long achievement. I am blind to everything else. I have a fantastic husband and 2 wonderful kids. But if I don't achieve something in my career during the day, I completely lose sight of that. So there's a blog post for you, Courtney, is talking to the type 3s that is how they measure success. And everything else, which other people would find incredibly successful and fulfilling, those things are completely lost on type 3s.
Wow.
They lose sight of them, and they have to be reminded by smart people like you all the time, almost daily. I would have to remember, okay, Courtney wants me to think about all the other things that I've achieved, regardless of my career, regardless of this new venture, regardless of my revenue goals. But as a type 3, that's something that I would have to wake up and intentionally meditate on in order for it to come true.
Well, and if I were to write a blog post about that, I would just be writing to myself because I'm also a type 3.
You're a type 3. I know that.
So yeah, I'm a type 3 wing 2, which means my top 2 are basically tied, but there's just a little bit more that leans toward achiever. And then second is the supportive advisor or the helper. And my top strength is self-believer, which is funny because a few years ago, prior to starting my own business, that was not my top strength. My top strength was empathy. It was empathizer. So it's interesting to also take those assessments, every couple of years and see how you're growing and how you're changing. And I love that my top strength is self-believer because it helps me to actually combat that imposter syndrome. I can do it. I can be gritty. Anything I put my mind to, I can accomplish. If I get knocked down, I can get back up. It's that kind of mindset. But for the achiever personality, girl, I hear you. I hear you loud and clear, because part of that personality is really wanting to be seen by others as a winner. And what I think is so helpful about taking these assessments is to become aware of that and to bring out the best parts of your personality type and to combat the parts that maybe don't serve you so well. So ever since taking that assessment, and I've, tried therapy, and I've worked with, an individual on just trying to become the best person that I can possibly be, I'm super aware that I put a lot of weight on winning and on being the best and on achieving and hitting my goals. I'm a big goal setter. But because I know that that's not truly how you define success, and
Mhm.
worth is such a central theme for me that I am able to actually look past it and say, this doesn't define me. This is not a loss, and look back to the work that I did as the growth and the real win. But it's tough. I definitely hear you. It's tough being that personality type and trying to not look at those numbers and not look at those losses as feeling like a failure.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, no, it's fun. I tell you, it's fun. And it's interesting that you said that your strengths have changed because I did the Clifton Strengths. Well, now I'm dating myself. I did the Clifton Strengths when the book first came out with Marcus Buckingham, which is clearly over 20 years ago. So I may have been even younger than you, Courtney. I was mid 20s, late 20s when I did it the first time. And I haven't done it since, but you're right. One of my strengths is, well, what's it called? I think it's called self-assurance. That's what it's called,
Okay.
self-assurance. And then after this past year of the incredible amount of imposter syndrome, and maybe even comparisonitis, where I look at other people achieving great things, or at least what I think they are achieving great things, and wondering, how do I measure up to that? I wonder if self-assurance would still fall in my top 5 strengths, or if that, if my self-assurance is so shaken over this past year that I would need a couple years almost to kind of get it back into my top 5. So anyways, it's food for thought. Maybe something I need to do again is do the strength finders all over again to see what my 5 are. But
I would. I think it's super interesting to compare and see what's changed and what's grown. And that's the other thing too. I mean, your strengths will fluctuate after experiences that you've been through. So,
Mhm.
when I got fired from a job a little while ago now, I would definitely not say that self-believer was my number one strength at
Yeah.
all. Like, I don't know what it would have been at that time, but it definitely would not have been self-believer. That was a time where I needed to do the work to rebuild my confidence. And, time heals all wounds as well. So
Mhm.
that, yeah, I think that's a perfect example of how much your strengths can actually shift and change. But I would definitely take it again. And if there are people in the audience who are curious about where you stand today, do it again. I think actually after this, I'm going to go take it again and see what happens. You
Yeah.
never know.
I think it's $70. It's really not, again, I did it back in the olden days where people published books, but now you can do the assessment online. And I think it's less than 70
Oh yeah.
US, which is such an incredible investment in yourself. Because there's so many resources now that talk you through, okay, you are an activator. How does that manifest in your life? How do people view you as an activator? And it gives you so many great insights, especially if you're in sales or hospitality and you're working with people all the time. So we don't work for Strength Finders peeps, but we recommend that you take the assessment. Courtney, thank you again so much for everything. Before I let you go, I do want to point people to your LinkedIn post of today, which is May 18th. You had an incredible post today, very empowering post about taking care of ourselves. I would love to know, how do you take care of you? How does Courtney take care of herself on days when you're feeling depleted?
Well, that is a really good question. And I am definitely focused on those things, especially now. So I love to listen to badass music by badass women. That's something that just lights me up. It gets me feeling my best. I feel powerful, confident, unstoppable, irreplaceable. So songs like, Beyonce and Demi Lovato and Miley Cyrus and all of those ladies, I
Yeah.
am so grateful for their artistry, because it truly, I believe, is a mood changer, and it's also a mindset changer. So that's one thing. And getting outside, getting in the sunshine. I went for a really lovely run yesterday, and even though I felt like I was dying at the end, I also felt like I had accomplished what I wanted to physically, but also was just in a completely different mental space afterward. So yes, definitely take care of yourselves. It's been such a difficult year, and you know what? Life can be really difficult sometimes too. So just building that foundation of balance where if things, start to push you one way or the other, you're able to come back to that centeredness. That is really, really important. And even going back to our original conversation about serving others, you really can't serve others unless you serve yourself first. You have to have that energy and that life within you in order to give and pour out of your own cup for somebody else.
So true. And I know we've all heard it said, you got to put on your own mask before
Yes.
others. I commented that on the post because that's exactly what it reminded me of is I can't serve my family. I can't serve my clients. I can't serve anybody until I serve myself. I serve myself with runs and with Pink. She's my muse. So my muse.
Nice. Yeah, she's a good one too. She's on the list for sure.
Courtney, you are a delight. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation because I would love to have you back again someday. Maybe in 6 months' time, as our businesses have grown, we can revisit this conversation and see how our lives have changed. But I would love to see you again. You've been delightful, and I will continue to follow all of your great work. Friends, like Courtney said, find her on LinkedIn, Courtney Stanley. That's Stanley. You can find her work there. And your website again, Courtney, is, oh shoot.
No, I got it. I got you. It's Courtney-Stanley.com. Don't go to Courtneystanley.com because there is a professional senior weightlifter that uses that that URL. So Courtney-Stanley.com is where you want to go. And you can always connect with me on other social media channels outside of LinkedIn at Courtney on Stage as well. And Leanne, I want to thank you for having me on here too for my first LinkedIn Live. And it's so great to hear about the professional journey that you've been on as well, and that you're fighting back and you're tapping into that achiever inside of you to keep pushing forward and remembering who the heck you are. So I'm delighted to be on, and I would love to have a conversation with you again.
Yay! Oh, that'll be fun. Well, thank you for joining us today. Thank you, everyone watching. Heather Reed, thank you for commenting. Always appreciate you, which reminds me, Heather, you and I need to talk about our next cup of tea. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Have a wonderful Tuesday, and we'll see you next Tuesday, same time. Bye for now.
Bye, everybody.